All right. Welcome everyone to Archetypal Hour. For those listening on a recording later, and especially for those that are with me now, I'm really excited to be joined by a couple new folks to the container. So that is really exciting. And I hope everyone is willing to be interactive. I think this space is especially fun when people are willing to jump off of mute or leave comments in the chat. Either way, I always set the disclaimer that I'm from an Italian Irish family from Jersey. We talk over each other, so like don't hesitate to come off mute, talk over me, add something if something's really coming up for you. Please do. Hey, Julie. Welcome, welcome. So actually, since we've got a couple folks that haven't been to the space, I'll just yes, I see some fist pumping because I've invited the archetype of Jersey, and I am a Jersey boy. Like it's a hard part of my identity to for me to ever shed. It's just part of the makeup, part of the makeup. And yeah, it might come out. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that you came from a big Italian family. That's so fun. Yes. All right. Well, then, Paisana, you know what I'm talking about. Feel free to butt in, make whatever comments. We'll have fun. It'll be like a big messy conversation at the table, where you don't really know who's talking because everyone's talking. That would be my goal. But so for those that haven't joined before, what the heck is this space? Well, it's really like it's just a space to allow the archetypes, these wonderful sort of shapes or forms or patterns that reoccur to make themselves known. And so I often like to start these containers, and I'll start it now to start getting people thinking to see if anyone wants to come off mute and share. But I always like to start like, what are some of the forms that seem to be forming your present right now, or maybe what you sense in your kind of immediate future as well? What are those shapes that seem to be shaping things, shaping perhaps the way you're seeing things, shaping your perceptions, shaping sort of your desire, shaping maybe your annoyances? And what are those patterns that seem to be patterning? And in past conversations, I've always tried to. I like trying to keep this grounded between in Earth, right? These archetypes are really like I think Noble had a great transmission with "Why Am I Like This" last week, and he talked a little bit about like the astrals and the archetypes. That's where they dwell. They're sort of in that realm of ideas, and so it's kind of us that gives them real animation in the real world. And so, but we want to ground that with this sort of interplay between idea and concepts, and actual earthly life and living as an embodied, fully human being. Sort of how we're all interconnected, interdependent, interwoven, interacting, interpenetrating, interlinking. And I use that word inter because it not only means sort of between, because I think that there's sort of this interplay, right, of the astral and the earth, but also inter to put it into earth, right, which I think is really timely. So we're going to be putting all the betweens into earth, into living matter, so into like living shapes and living forms and living patterns. This interplay of dense and subtle. So I'm wondering if anyone has anything that's coming to mind as I was rambling about this from inter to into. Exactly, Anna. Thank you. If anyone has any archetypes, forms, shapes, patterns, it could take the form of anything. Could take the uh, could be a symbol, right? That's another kind of way. Could be a deity, right? Which usually deities are sort of have become a unique version of a larger, broader archetype generally. Um, but I think deities are really important part of the archetypal landscape for sure. But I'm just curious if anything is coming up for people. Are there archetypes that they feel were really present for them this week or present for them right now in this moment as they think about their week to come? Feel free to come off of mute or drop it in the chat. Ooh. Now this is fun. So Anna has just shown a picture. She says, I walked by this today, and what we see is a blindfolded Justice. Now, it doesn't name Justice, it's just the top part torso, and we see her holding the scales in her left hand and a blindfold over her eyes. And Justice has been this reoccurring archetype that has shown up so much in some of our containers. I know a lot of the circle containers that Anna runs, Justice just kept showing up. Justice has also shown up a lot in field tuning. And I think one of original archetypal hours, we did talk a little bit about her. So Anna, I'm just curious, like, because we were talking about, I saw this in one of our other threads, but yeah, like when you saw Justice today, like, just what came to your mind, like when you saw her? I'm picturing you just like laughing, like this lady follows me everywhere. But I'm curious, what came up for you?
That was exactly my reaction, Adam. I was just like, I'm just laughing. Like, I'm like, is this confirmation bias? Like, I'm not sure.
She's persistent. Justice is persistent. No worries, love. That's funny. And yeah, like if you were to try, and again, this might not be easy to do, but if you were to try to put words to what you sense Justice is drawing your attention to these days, I'd love to hear it. I know that's kind of a hard question, but I'm curious.
Mm, it is a hard question, but also, and I kind of was like even thinking about that before you asked. So thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Um, hmm, I think it kind of relates to. I wrote a little bit about this in Vent or in the Vent channel earlier, but kind of like this. I guess. I mean, you said interplay, so like I feel like Justice is asking me to like um integrate like a way of being that's like that allows me to like critique but like with compassion and like sort of like rewriting some of this like puritanical programming that's like needs to like exile people or like exile myself
Mm.
um when I make a mistake. So I think for me it's a lot about like compassion, to be honest.
Mm.
Um and like self-forgiveness too. Um yeah.
That's beautiful. So it's like that's really interesting. So Justice, you think, has been coming in and maybe pointing you towards the more merciful, compassionate side of Justice. Um, and as a
Yeah.
counterbalance to the puritanical impulse that's kind of written into the fabric of certainly American culture.
Yeah, and like my bloodline, to be fair. Like um yeah, I think I'm going to just trust that that came into the container cuz like there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe that's not really it, but I think it's pertinent that like that's what came to heart when you asked the question, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's really beautiful, actually. I love this sort of merciful side of Justice because I think sometimes, yeah, Justice, it's such a big, wide archetype, and there's so many different versions of Justice too. Hey, Hoda. But I love that, like, you're really feeling drawn towards this more merciful, passionate, and less like, yeah, like I like you also. I think you used the word critique, like this ability to critique, to weigh in without,
Mhm.
without like, no, without. I'm not trying to think what the word is. It's funny too when I hear critique. For some reason, I'm automatically thinking of the tarot justice, that giant sword she's holding. I don't know why that word's drawing me to a sword, but it feels like, yeah, a way to critique without necessarily doing too much damage. I don't know. That's really
Yeah, like how to make a clean cut or like
oh,
how
perfect.
like how to wield a sword, kind
Yes.
of. Yeah.
Mm, cool.
Hey, um, so the um, thank you, Anna. Um, Justice is interesting coming up for me today because I went to a local Unitarian Universalist church for the first time since I was a kid because I was raised Unitarian Universalist. Um, and I noticed in their program that and in their kind of opening words, they have this big emphasis on justice, which is refreshing to me that they care so much about it. And in terms of like social justice, um,
Mm,
yeah, and they make a point of it to point out like we are on. I'm in Massachusetts, and we're on the indigenous land, and pointing out like what they even mentioned like reparations and things like that, but also at the sermon they talked about safety, and I thought, what is the intersection of safety and justice and what that means, like, and I thought about boundaries and what that means. If anybody wants to add on to that, I'm not sure exactly where that could go, but if it sparks any ideas.
thank you so much, Lum. That's beautiful. And I'm curious, like when justice came up, um, yeah, it sounds like in that tradition, it was coming up with specifically related to social justice, but also you said reparations too was something that was named specifically and indigenous populations. That's beautiful. And then this question about boundaries. Yeah, I'm curious if that is. That's a great question, Lump. If that's sparking something for someone, what rule about boundaries and justice, which I feel like has come up in maybe some other containers when justice was coming up around, I think it was coming up around like Venus retrograde period. So there was some questions about Venus and like especially like that romantic kind of element of Venus and justice. I remember there's some interesting conversations coming up which I feel like might relate to boundaries in some way, but I'm just gonna let that marinate with everyone and see if anyone has something that pops up for them on that about justice and boundaries. Hmm. I, I don't know why I'm like being drawn, I feel like, to the blindfold. I don't know how that relates to boundaries, but the blindfold is really striking me, this archetypal blindfold. Okay, Lum. Hmm. All right. Well, so more compassionate justice. Hmm. I'm wondering if there are archetypes and maybe even like archetypes from like maybe even fictional or story um of this sort of more compassionate side of justice that come up for people. I think it's a really wonderful, beautiful facet of justice. And I'm curious if there's any archetypes that are coming up related to that other side of this sort of compassionate, merciful side of justice. Ooh, that's a great question, Anna. We have another really powerful question. Let's see what pops for people. But this question came up. Yeah, like what do people mean when they say justice is blind? Yes. Julie says perhaps the blindfold represents the absence of bias. It's an interesting way to show bias to show not bias though, because it's like it's sort of in the archetypal sense. It's drawing a connection between what the eyes see and bias, which is quite fascinating to me. I think maybe it's pointing us to the fact that our eyes can really quite deceive us. They can. they can narrow us. It's like, in the dark, all things look the same, right? It's like a big empty field of potential. It could be anything. It could be a rope or a snake, right? It could be both at once in a way, sort of like in a quantum kind of way, right? Whereas with sight, with light, suddenly now we see things. We see shapes and forms and patterns. And when we see those shapes and forms and patterns, we start associating them with things that we've already known. So to say, oh, I know that shape. Oh, I know that. I think of like this is a really weird example for some reason, but my daughter, she, grade school age, watching cartoons, she'll make distinctions about characters based on their faces, right? Because then the character's like, well, if they have eyelashes, that says something in the cartoon world, right? If it's a maybe feminine versus masculine. If their eyebrows are pointed a certain way, it might mean that they're more deceptive or happy or playful or mean or angry, right? So there's a lot that's going on just by the shapes where she'll say, I don't know if I trust that character just because of the shape of their face or their eyes or their eyebrows. And I feel like that's somehow related to this bias that our eyes have of what they know from the past based on that same shape. Welcome, welcome to those joining us. We're talking about what archetypes are alive, present, showing up in your field, maybe this week or reoccurring for you right now, or things that maybe you're sensing have something to tell you about this moment or in the immediate future. And right now, we're talking a little bit about justice, the archetype of justice, and a little bit about what it means that justice is blind or blindfolded. Julie says it feels especially important since most humans heavily rely on sight as a sense in current time. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is so like even more crazy now with the phones where it's like this sort of race to get our eyeballs. Our eyes are always glued and fixed to something. And it's always being there's different things competing for our eyes, right? Or competing for our attention. And our eyes are often really closely connected with this idea of attention. Yes, and Julie says, so taking that out of the equation of justice is a bit jarring. Yeah, it's like, what does that look like to have justice, but without the power of eyes? Aren't we going to miss important things without sight that might tell us what the justice, what's just? And this archetype is saying, no, you're not missing anything by being without your sight, which is a very kind of, yeah, difficult thing to kind of reconcile with how we normally view and see the world. Or, as Hoda says, or will we have to rely on senses other than sight? And that does seem like maybe that's what she's telling us. Anna says, did the moon just enter the chat with that question of relying on senses other than sight? And I'm curious if you want to say more about the moon here. I love this. And when you said that, I'm thinking of the Two of Swords right now in my head from the Rider Waite Smith, but I'm curious what's coming up for you.
Well, I mean, I really don't know, like, well, I do know how other people interpret the moon card, but to me, that is like a hallmark of the moon is like
Mm.
being able to navigate darkness and like rely on others on senses other than sight
I
from my
really
interpretation.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I love that, and I feel like the way you phrase that, what came up for me right away was this sort of role that the moon has as being like Lord of the Waters and Lord of the Tide, and this ability to sort of move and stir the waters within us and on the planet. And yeah, what does that mean when our waters get stirred? The- but it's interesting to think of that as maybe more reliable on in a just sense potentially. Interesting. Yeah, what came up for me when you said moon was I'm gonna share it in the chat, was the Two of Swords in the Rider Waite Smith deck has a woman who's sitting blindfolded with a crescent moon behind her, and she's got two swords pointing on either side of her. And it's like very much like a decision point type of a archetype. And I think in past reads, I've often felt like this read is looking at doing a more intuitive, going within type of decision making, where blinding actually helps someone go within. Anna says Loki combines justice and moon. Yeah, and so I guess now that I'm thinking about it, like, to Hoda's point before about other senses other than sight, I'm thinking about just the tradition of closing your eyes when you meditate or going into a cave in a lot of lineages to remove sight, helping you see the inner light, the inner visions, the things that are contained within, and how they might guide better or perhaps differently, or perhaps leading us to more justice, or to kind of circle back to Nobu's container, which I mentioned at the top, where he was talking a lot about sort of intuition as a way to allow karma to ripen and come to the surface, um, for harvest, so to speak, is that, yeah, something about removing our sight of the earthly plane allows this sort of inner visioning to occur, which might lead us to some interesting choices and decisions and things that might lead us to a path. Now, I'm curious how that relates to justice. Interesting. Sorry, I'm just kind of talking out loud. Someone cut me off, please. Come off mute. Share what's coming up for you. Mm, mm. Beautiful.
It was interesting what you said about um intuition guiding us through our karma. Uh, and I thought relating to justice, um, in some versions of karma, I think there are different interpretations of what karma is. Karma can be seen as sort of like a poetic justice that or like the almost like what comes around goes around sort of justice. Sometimes I guess like in life it can feel like sometimes things resolve themselves, like the universe balances itself out. If an injustice has been brought, it it's something I at least in my life it's always felt like it's been taken care of somehow, um whether indirectly or directly. Yeah.
Ooh, thank you for saying that. Thank you for bringing this dimension of karma in. And yeah, it really does feel like, yeah, it's almost like that blindfold. And if we're going to kind of go with this intuition, like kind of akin to what, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me. And like I said, check out that most recent Why Am I Like This for more on that transmission. But yeah, that this sort of intuition is bring us to these events, these things that allow the karma to come up to the surface. And something about that karma, that sort of required action, or this action that's coming up, is sort of giving us this opportunity to maybe balance the scales, or to bring justice to some elements of ourselves that have been repressed, or that need expression, or that need resolution. Um, yes. And that
I
with
would,
sight, we might not walk into some of those the same way. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, what just came up for me was just the intuition going inside the blindfold. It's to me it feels like we have internal justice towards ourselves, like our relationship with ourselves. We have to give
Yes.
ourselves, we have to also provide ourselves, treat ourselves in a just manner. And if we are treating ourselves in an unjust manner, we also have to balance that.
Yes. Beautifully said. And now I'm feeling like that, to circle back to like the social justice element that you brought in. I'm feeling that popular refrain, no justice, no peace. What does that look like when there's no inner justice? No inner peace. Or at least that's been my
Oh
experience.
yeah, totally. That's yeah, that's great.
Mm. Ooh. Before we jump to anyone else that has something that's popping for them, any archetypes that are alive or kind of making themselves more known or drawing your curiosity. Any other thoughts on this Justice before? I'm sure Justice this won't be the only time she comes up in this container, but just wanted to hold space for any last thoughts on Justice that really feel like they should be mentioned and voiced in this container. And thank you all for every. This has been such a rich one already. And I see some folks typing, so I'm gonna hold on. Yes. But it says the Libra archetype is coming up for me right now. Yes, in relation to justice. Indeed. Indeed. And it's funny. Oh wow, Anna was just said Hoda, I was just legit typing that. So Libra really wants to come in. Okay, let's talk about Libra for a second or two here. For sure. It's funny too, this morning I was like, just sometimes I just get into these like, let me go back to basics with astrology archetypes because it's just like the basic stuff with astrology is so rich. Um, and I was just thinking, like, it was when you think about like breaking down a sign, I always think like for me, the most important archetypes or the most important ingredients of that sign are the planet that rules it and the element. And so Libra, sort of like, what does that look like to have Venus energy in airy, the air aspects of Venus? But Anna's saying, "Ooh, what came up for you specifically was Saturn in Libra, which I believe is his exaltation, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. If someone please help me or correct me on that. I might have to look it up. But I feel like Libra is the exaltation of Saturn. Am I making this up? Who's got that knowledge in their head? Let's see. Let me look at my phone. Oh, it is. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. So that's a really important component of Libra too, right? That its exaltation is Saturn, who is like cold and a dry planet too. So it's like this cold gust of wind. At least that's the archetype that's coming in my mind of like this cold wind that's clarifying. But Saturn, and that's funny too, because Saturn is often a planet associated with karma, which is something that we've been talking about a bit. Interesting. Yeah. Jenna said there's a sync going on too. It's been so windy here today, like gale force winds. It's been really windy near me too. That's funny. Maybe that's why I'm thinking of cold winds. Mm. And Hoda, I know you're driving, so you might not be able to, but if you had anything more you wanted to share about Libra or what's sort of feeling alive with Libra right now for you, I'd love to hear it. Like, wow. Oh, and Agnew's here too. Thank you. I didn't even see him. Welcome, welcome, Agnew. And just to catch you up, we're just talking about archetypes that feel particularly present for you in this moment, that feel like they're kind of shaping things, shaping the way you're looking. Feel like you're seeing those patterns reoccur. And speaking of reoccurring patterns, we've been spending some time thinking and talking about justice, which has been a reoccurring archetype that Anna has seen and thrown up a lot of our containers. Hoda says, well, I'm thinking of the symbol of the scales and what is being measured. Now, this is a really good question. Woo, let's take a second to just think about that. What is being measured? And now I'm thinking of like Ma'at, which has come up a lot as well in these containers. And with her, like there was a very specific thing being measured, right? It's the heart being measured against this feather. Um, this lightness. So there's like a lightness of the heart that's being measured. I don't know if that's the Ma'at though. I don't know like yeah, do we think that resonates for Libra more generally? Or do we think there's other things that are going on in that measuring scales of the Libra archetype? Same goes for justice, actually, Anna. Like, what do you think? What do you think that woman that you saw today was? What is she measuring exactly? What is it? What's on either side of that scale? What's being scaled? Hmm. What is being measured? Whew. So we've got the heart as one. Anyone else have anything that's a feeling like maybe and it could be not? It doesn't have to be an answer that's like definitive. It's more like in your sort of inner justice archetype right now, maybe if justice is present for you, what do you feel like your justice, your inner justice, that sort of justice that lives within you that helps you navigate? What is she weighing for you? What is she helping you measure? What is she helping you see or assess or judge? Ooh, Agnes said the use of time. Now that is powerful. What? Wait a second. Hoda, is that a picture live right now? Hoda just drove by another justice. She is really making herself known. That's crazy. Wow. And in this case, she's like wearing this beautiful gown. She's got the scales in her left hand and the right. And then another scale? What is happening? Hoda's seeing another scale sending pictures. Wow. Julie says she looks ready. Ooh. I didn't even know this was by my house till just now, says Hoda. That's wild. So this scales, the scales make wanna make themselves known along with justice. Agnew, you don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm inviting to either come off mute or share in the chat just if you want to say anything more about the use of time, because that does feel extremely juicy. If you're willing to share more on that. Yes, and Saturn's relationship to time too. Yes, and yeah, I don't know if you heard that part, but when Holden mentioned Libra, and I instantly thought of Saturn in Libra, which is also Saturn's exaltation. So there's some really cool stuff going on here. Yes, please, of course, take your time. Julie says, I'm being reminded of the wound gift of Sidereal Libra. I'm going to share 2 tweets. The wound, I'm reading a tweet from Dana Lynn Nichols, who at People's Oracle. Hopefully it's going to let me actually click into this thing so I can read it formally. The wound of Sidereal Libra is coercion. It's being stripped of your autonomy and agency via punishment and manipulation. The coping strategy of Sidereal Libra is compliance, even in the midst of violence, emotional manipulation, or strict rules. Compliance is, and oh man, I lost the rest of it. I'll find it. But wow. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Discord before I lose myself there. Oh, their lives. Yep. Ooh. Wow. And also it says in this chat, the gift of Sidereal Libra. This is from the Twitter also. The gift of Sidereal Libra is being strategic. Its ability to navigate the complexities of relationships while still having power and agency to move towards what sustains and preserves. Now, if that isn't a useful gift for finding justice, I don't know what is. The ability to navigate the complexities of relationships while still having power and agency to move towards what sustains and preserves their lives. Dang. Oh, Anna says the strategy part. I'm like, oh, is this why Libra is the opposite of Aries? Yes, this Libra Aries axis. It's funny too because, like, yeah, it's all about action, right? This axis, right? Because Saturn, I mean, a Libra is often like sort of like the sort of pop astrology stereotype is of the Libra is someone who's has a hard time making decisions. They're weighing things too much. And the sort of similarly pop archetype of Aries is that they're rash and impulsive and they do the opposite. They act too fast. Interesting. Lump says this hits home for me in a personal way with a recent relationship experience that had manipulation. I was too compliant. I'm very sorry to hear that, Lump. But it does feel like, just for the way that that was phrased, it does feel like you've learned some extremely important things about yourself, um, and about the way you want to move from that interaction. And yeah, there's some affirmations here of others who have been there before. Yes, Lump said I learned a lot. That's why I keep bringing up boundaries. Amen. I can't, for some reason, whenever I think of Libra, like I can't help but think of my mom. She's a Libra sun, and she very much uh conforms to some of those stereotypes. And yeah, it was all about this sort of delicate dance and navigation with her. But because of that, because she was always trying to like affect an outcome without showing her hand too much, manipulation was just right there always. Interesting. Mm. Yes, and like, can justice? I feel like asking this question, like, can there really be justice with manipulation? Like, is that a tool that can really affect justice? I'm not so sure. They feel pretty counter one another, but then again, I am thinking of I don't know. I'm gonna ask this group: is manipulation is sort of guile something that somehow can actually serve justice or no? Now I'm feeling the egregore of Puritans coming back up in my own body mind, Anna, thinking about like, well, if it got justice, maybe it is, and then the other part's like, that's so wrong, manipulation. Agnew says, I guess the thing that stands out about my experience in this arc of my life is that I'm back at home, and in addition to the boundaries that come with that more structured place, I'm building boundaries around what I do with my time, uh, slash, in quotes, the places I go. It's about aligning all resources and actions more coherently. I love that phrase. I love how you're using coherently there. Wow. Aligning all resources and actions more coherently. That feels like, oh, it does feel like it's really something essential about justice too, the way that you're phrasing that to me. I wonder if anyone else feels that too. This they go on. This has appeared more clearly as well. I picked up an hourglass a while ago, though the cat broke it, and a little statue of an owl came to me auspiciously, a symbol of discernment. Mm, I love these archetypes and how they're relating to this question of time and where we go and how we align our resources and actions. And there's something funny about the cat breaking the hourglass. I'm like just letting that sit in the archetypal way. Like I'm going beyond like the kind of like regular sort of way of saying, oh yeah, kind of like to fuck with things, right? But like no, let's think about this like we're in a dream. Like what's going on there? The cat knocking over the hourglass. That feels potent to me. That feels really potent. That's funny. Just a little bit. Knock that thing. Like a little like yeah. And there's something like for some reason the word wild is coming up because like cats are like these things that are these beautiful, wonderful, mysterious creatures that are like domesticated in quotes, and that they're never really domesticated. They're wild as hell. They do whatever the hell they want. And I think it's just funny that the cat, this sort of like archetypal symbol of doing whatever the hell you want, this independent spirit is like, yeah, no, fuck you, time. Sorry for my language today, but it's knocking that hourglass over. Agnew says, in quotes, no to strictly structured time. Ooh, yes. They go on, hourglass is also linear and discrete time. Yes. Yes, it's like a very specific aspect of time, that linear time, and that's come up in other containers too, versus more like what's been called different things, but I think I've called it like the rhythmic time or cyclical. Joey says, "Try something different," is what I hear from the seed. Try it differently. He says, "Nope, I'm not even letting you look at that thing anymore." Grains that fall in a line, says Agnew. Ooh, grains that fall in a line. Mm. Julie says in cat asshole language. Oh, they're such devious little spirits. I love them. I love also that in the Middle Eastern world, like they're just sort of widespread knowledge that the jinn are clearly in the mix with cats, which makes so much sense to me. That of course cats are possessed by jinn. Like, how else would it be? Yeah, Anna, check it out. And I'm not really doing it justice because it's not a lineage I come from, but there's some really fun stuff about this sort of I guess what I want to use the word folklore, but I don't know if that's the right word, but a lot of the sorts of things that come up about the jinn taking the form of cats. Or when you're with a cat, you might be in the presence of a jinn. That's funny. Thank you all. This has been fun talking about this Libra and justice and the measuring. And the cat's delivering her own justice with her little paw. Oh, Hoda, thank you for chiming in. She says, "Yup, it's fun. It's funny lore. It is funny. It is funny." Anyone else have anything they want to share on the measuring piece? I love what Agnew said about kind of measuring what to do with our time. I mean, that's a really interesting thing when it comes to justice too. Like, if we were to go back to like kind of that social justice thing that Lump brought in from their experience at the Universalist Church, the Unitarian Church, it does kind of raise this question about like justice in a social kind of political sense of like what's worth all the time too, right? Like, what are we going to spend our time arguing and fighting about? Also, there's a huge amount of energy and time to try to bring justice to things. And it's a really interesting question. At least for me, it's coming up as an interesting question. Lump says, "Oh yeah, pick your battles too." Yeah. Mm, 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 mm.
Hey y'all.
Hey,
What's up, Adam? I
hey.
wanted to share and muse a little bit about and kind of like I guess synthesize some of what's coming up for me regarding like Saturn, Libra, the scales, and this symbol of like justice in relation to peace. And I think like from like the offset of this container, which I was only able to like vocally join after I finished running my errands, I was thinking about the fact that or a sense that I get that often the symbol for me justice comes up when I have to like mobilize myself to seek justice for myself. And one of the biggest challenges with that is like not exacting justice or resisting the urge to exact justice in the way that it was like enacted upon me, or like with the same velocity of which injustice was like exacted on me to be like, I'm just gonna, like sword them right back. And it's like, well, that doesn't actually like balance the scales. And so I think for me, like with Libra coming up and this synthesis of it being related to the exaltation of Saturn, it makes me wonder because there is like a lot of egregores around the Libra archetype. But one of the things that I've learned from just other Libras or like people who have a lot of Libra placements in their chart is this ability to measure one's own self, like one's own temperament against the circumstance, and like almost welcoming in a particular circumstance, whether it's relational, social, and kind of allowing that circumstance to like help refine the way that justice gets enacted for any one given person after the fact. And so it's interesting because also my my sidereal sun placement is Libra, and like, of course, like most people, after I like devoured as much sidereal lore as I could, I was like, wow, I really relate to being like a sidereal Libra. And I also wanted to like comment on the social aspect of Libras being mounted with the burden of being like socially manipulative and like even spineless shielding to some people. And like, I don't know, like, I mean, I obviously actively resist those things, but I also believe that there is this gem of wisdom that rests in Libras um that has to do with that like measuring one's temperament against the circumstance, and also how to exact justice without disrupting the peace of a local environment, which I mean I struggle with. I'm not like a tropical Libra, just the sidereal one. So I mean in reality I'm like a tropical Scorpio, but it brings up a lot for me. And I also really love this piece, and I'm glad that Agnew brought it in relation to like Saturn, and how um, Saturn in certain lineages, it's even said that Saturn is the entity that we answer to once we transcend out of this body. And so it almost makes me wonder if justice is in service to um, not only just linear time, but a variety of different choice points that people have at their disposal. And kind of like what Agnew says, this ability to account for what people do with their time, which is, I feel like, is deeply Saturnian. So, yeah, I just kind of wanted to put that out there. Thanks for receiving.
Thank you so much. Wow, there's so much there, Hoda. But I'm like, I'm just really. I put it in the chat too. I'm especially stuck, or what especially struck me out of all of that beautiful transmission was this idea of the scales measuring your sort of self and temperament against the circumstance, and sort of this equilibrium point that is bringing together the internal state and the external state, right? And I love how you said that, how that sort of calculus is so much more different, so much more nuanced and complex than um than just sort of returning, right? Which is sort of like, oh, this happened, so this has to happen, like the sort of equal opposite reaction, kind of like Newtonian sort of reaction. Whereas at Libra, like you can clown a Libra maybe for, or some that archetype of like, oh, they just are indecisive. But it's like, yo, they're just thinking about so much more than you are. Like I actually have a coaching client that's a Libra, and like she's just, her calculus is very complex because there's so many data points that she is sort of taking in and weighing in her mind. So like, yeah, there can be some indecision because like there's so much more layers to the analysis than maybe someone that doesn't have that sort of energy strong within them. And I love the way you pinpoint that as like the sort of weighing of the internal sort of who you are, and your, you know, what you're, the stuff you're made of, and the environment that you find, the circumstance, the actual event, and trying to find this equilibrium in this extremely super precise space time. You know, like I don't think a Libra would be, and this is now me kind of jumping ahead more on this archetype. So those with that presence, let me know. Although I have Venus as my Atmakarika uh, uh, in Sidereal, so I feel close to Venus enough to say that like there's something there about, you know, I don't think a Libra, people who are very Venusian, would particularly like saying, well, you did this in that circumstance, so that means that's always the way. Like, no, whoa, that was that circumstance, dude. There's a whole other circumstance over here. You know, like don't tie me down to how I reacted in that one moment. This ain't scripture. This is alive. Mm. I want to go back up to something Agnew said about the Tao Te Ching. Said the things you're saying remind me of this section from the Tao Te Ching. Quote, newborn, we are tender and weak in death. We are rigid and stiff. Living plants are supple and yielding. Dead branches are dry and brittle. So the hard and unyielding belong to death. and the soft and pliant belong to life. An inflexible army does not triumph. An unbending tree breaks in the wind. Thus, the rigid and inflexible will surely fail, while the soft and flowing will prevail. From chapter 76. Wow, that is beautiful. Wow, that feels so related. Yes, thank you for bringing that into this container. Yes, and you're right. Like, speaking of that wind, that cold wind, if the branch is too hard and brittle and dry, that thing's just gonna snap. But if it's got some bend to it, which we know Libra's got some bend to it, right? Libra's flexible. Beautiful. And I'm just going back up. Hoda said, yes, contact is so important. So yes, thank you for affirming that point. Agnew says, what this type of thought also has revealed to me is the reason that, quote, normalcy is the way it is. The reason the status quo is what it is. It's a great way to understand why things rest, where, and why they do. Mm. Mm. Woo! Wow, this is it. This has been fun. I feel like that, to me, that feels like, I don't know, that just wrapped it up on a bow for me, Hoda. I just want to say that out loud. I feel like what you said wrapped up. I don't think I'm gonna look at the scales differently. I'm gonna really let that sit. I'm just like kind of talking out loud as like literally my body mind is reacting to this really lovely archetypal image of the weighing. And the heart and the feather, like I'm going back to that for a second. And maybe someone who knows more about the feather of Ma'at. Sorry to put you on the spot, Hoda, as because you're coming to mind, but I know you're not the only one that has really tuned into these Kemetic lineages and deities. But I can't help but see that kind of from that lens of the circumstance too, of like the heart being weighed against. Like, how does that? I don't know why. I'm like, my mind is really wanting to connect the feather to this point that you're making about circumstance. I'm not sure why, but it really wants to do that. I don't know if it's forcing something, but that's what I'm just talking out loud. That's what's drawing me in. But I'm really just so grateful for this. Ooh. All right, I'm gonna hold a little bit of space to see if there's any final thoughts on this, and then see. Okay, thank you, Hoda. Often some lore relate the feather to Thoth, the god of wisdom, learning, and thought. Now that is interesting. That this sort of wisdom is this light, feathery archetype. I'm just thinking about how that relates to what Agnew had posted from the Tao Te Ching about this sort of hard and flexible versus soft and supple being alive. This feather that's, I mean, nothing's softer than that. And Julie said, and he's the moon god too, if I'm remembering correctly. See, says Hoda. Yeah. Uh-huh. And owls. There's the owl coming back too. Ooh, there's a couple things being brought in together. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna let all that coalesce in everyone's mind, body, and see if anything is coming up. But yes, yes, this sort of lightness measured against the heart. And what does that mean for our heart to become lighter? Does that mean also that it becomes more soft, more living? Mm, mm. And I see Anna typing. I'm curious, Anna. I'm not to like put you on the spot, but since you were the one that helped bring justice into this container, who we've just spent an hour with, like that hour flew by for me because Justice had so much to say. I feel like through all of you, I love what I keep referencing last week's Why Am I Like This from Nobu because I feel like it just really is staying with me. But once again, I'm doing probably a terrible job paraphrasing, but they were really describing this sort of definition of awareness as sort of these interactions between bodies at different levels. And I'm just thinking about what that means of like this justice, larger body of justice, and that how it's interacting with our bodies, right? And all of us are bringing in different aspects of our relationship with justice, and how it's painting this broader awareness right now in real time. But I am curious to go back to you, Anna, who brought this in, to see if this conversation is, I don't know, maybe deepening or bringing your awareness to different aspects of justice that maybe weren't on your radar in the same way as when you first started to talk about this. And no worries if not, but I just wanted to kind of give that opportunity to see if anything is really clicking differently, since you were the one who lovingly invited her in. And I hope she's having a great time. It feels chock full of juice. Woo! Yes. Her cup runneth over. Thank you, Anna. You had no idea what you were about to open up for all of us here. Dang, I feel like I'm even thinking about those scales of justice differently too. Mm. Just gonna hold space. I see some folks typing, see if anything else that's coming through on this. And I guess also I just we have a little more time together. I want to invite anyone else that's coming up with things that are coming up for them that maybe they want to bring into this container, any archetypes. It's funny, I had this whole thing in my head of like, I might go down this direction. And I'm so glad I didn't, because I really love the way this conversation went. Agnew shares the fractal scales. Each platter holds another set, and so on and so on and so on. Two is not just two. Ooh. Ooh. The fractal scales. Agnew, do you want to share a little bit more about that? I love that, kind of bringing in like the geometries of these scales, where there's like, you go to the platter on the scale. I sort of like, in my mind, this is how my mind's going. I don't know if this is how you meant it, Agnew, but like, you're going onto the scale and you realize that on the scale there's another scale, and then you go onto one of the scales on that scale and you realize there's another scale, and it's just, there's just endless amounts of scales. And human beings, our actions are meant to somehow balance all these freaking scales that are infinitely recursing, that are fractaling out. If that's a verb, I don't know if fractaling is a verb, but whatever. It's 2024. We can make shit up. Agnes says, yeah, I was drawing that mention of a Libra client with complex calculus. Directly into the symbolism. That complex calculus is just the scales taken to their limit. Woo! Yes. Yeah, that is a really because you have like one of these little scales that's within the scale, it's within the scale, it's within the scale. You move a little bit there, and suddenly we got to now do something about the other scale on the other side, and it gets really complex. Julie, thank you. She says, I love making up words. Me too. I think it's fun. I'm glad that, yeah. So please bring your made up words to this container always. And I said, oh my God, my channel just went whoosh. I'm imagining hopefully something with this sort of scales on scales. I feel like that meme too is just scales all the way down. Yep, it's just scales all the way down. Thank you, Lump. I really appreciate you being in the container with us. Thank you so much for contributing. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lexi. Just bringing in another translation of the 76 hardness. I'm going to read it out loud. Living people are soft and tender. Corpses are hard and stiff. 10,000 things, the living grass, the trees, are soft, pliant. Dead, they're dry and brittle. So hardness and stiffness go with death. Tenderness, softness go with life. And the hard sword fails. The stiff trees felled. The hard and great go under. The soft and weak stay up. Ooh. So funny how that translation has a little extra little spice to it. Sort of this upside down kingdom archetype type of a vibe. Sort of blessed are the poor kind of vibes from my Christian lineage coming up for me. Agnew was talking about Le Guin has a translation. This is the Le Guin translation. Yeah, it's come up, and it's. I think someone actually has the PDF posted in a thread, Agnew. So if you look, you should be able to find a free version of that translation. And actually, Nobu's been playing around with the idea of maybe doing a book club around it. Hoda says yes, it's giving the meek will inherit the earth. Yeah, that's the kind of vibe I got with that. Yeah. Anna says, I have this really distinct memory of my grandma and grandpa's bathroom growing up. They had one of those situations where the mirrors were on 3 walls and you could see yourself all the way down. I used to spend hours looking in them. Yes, that definitely relates to this sort of like this sort of scale within the scale sort of imagery of all the fractals, where it's like, but I just picture all these Annas just like, but this trying to weigh justice, the Hall of Mirrors. Yes. Yes. The duat. Ooh. The duat has been invoked. And actually, it's funny, the underworld has been coming up so much in these containers, and you asked Toto what I was going to possibly go into today. I've been really drawn for a long time offering emeralds to this container. Beautiful. I've been drawn to the story of Psyche and Cupid. And I picked up a book. I found out that it's a folklore, right, mythology, but it actually shows up in a novel the first time it's really laid out. And there's other versions of it, but I finally picked up a copy of this book called The Golden Ass, which is a great name. And the Golden Ass is like by I'm gonna butcher this name, by Apuleius. Is like one of the only, like, it's the oldest full Latin novel that exists. And it's great. It's like a really bawdy read. It's fun. But the story of Psyche and Cupid shows up as like a tale within the tale. This old woman is telling the story. Yeah, there's a thread that I started that I have to give more love to. But I was gonna just maybe go into that a little bit. I don't know if it really feels related right now, so I might save it for another container. But it's a pretty wild story. But anyway, the reason why I thought of it again was because you mentioned the Dua, and in that story, it's one of many stories that I've been drawn to lately, where there's a trip to the underworld. Psyche has to, as part of one of her trials that Venus puts her through, she has to go into the underworld. And the passage on the underworld is so crazy because, like, it's just so treacherous. There's so many things that Psyche has to be warned about. And of all the people to kind of help her with that, it's actually a tower that speaks to her. So the archetype of tower is helping her. Anyway, that's something I might go into in a future container. But yeah, so Psyche and Cupid was something that was been in my field of awareness and sort of coming up for me this week. What about everybody else as we kind of see if anything else is coming up that people haven't had a chance to discuss, archetypes that might be coming up for them this week, or that are that feel alive for them at this current moment. And maybe it's fun if it's just really we're honing in on the justice, but I want to just open it up to see if there's other archetypes that might want to come play and come to the dance floor. Right? It's an open mic night for the archetypes here always, and I'm curious if anyone else has archetypes that have something they want to say. Hmm. Hmm. Lexi says, I feel like this aligns. Le Guin writes a comment on the bottom of it. This is the 76th part of the Tao Te Ching. And it says, in an age when hardness is supposed to be the essence of strength, and even the beauty of women is reduced nearly to the bone, I welcome this reminder that tanks and tombstones are not very adequate role models, and that to be alive is to be vulnerable. Woo! And this, wow, this ain't, thank you so much, Lexi. If this ain't full circle to what Anna was saying, in my opinion, I don't know what is. about this sort of more merciful, compassionate side of justice. I feel like this is really, I feel like this is just justice hard at work again, giving us another way to think about what this soft vulnerability, what this lifefulness, to make up another word, um, has to say to us about justice. Mm, yeah, because what would justice be if it wasn't life affirming? Like, what would be the point of justice if it just leads to death? Ugh. Yet, that is the sort of form of justice that many of us are familiar with by just reading the news and taking stock of what's in the air sometimes, especially in a place like America. Agnew says, if the scales were stuck, the hinge needing oil. Mmm, that lubrication, yeah, to fight that dryness, that brittleness that brings death. How do we bring that juiciness? And Venus, in a lot of traditions, astrologically, just to kind of bring it back to Libra for a second, it's the lord of juice, of fluids. Hoda says it feels like there's Shukra. Yes, exactly. Like especially in the Yodish, the lord of the fluids. Um, and Hoda says it feels like there's a nice delineation happening for the exacting justice as an action and justice as a life principle. Yes. 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 And for some reason, this like life principle part of justice, like I'm thinking back, maybe because we talked about the Dua and the underworld, and I mentioned the underworld, when justice can't happen in sort of the everyday, justice will happen in the underworld, hidden beneath the soil. The chthonic forces, right? They will balance if the forces of the light, or I mean, in terms of like the day time, the sort of above ground won't. I think I'm mixing metaphors here, so forgive me, but yeah, I'm just thinking about this element of like the deep, what's buried, how there's justice there, where all the components of what falls to the ground and finds its way into the earth has its ability to nurture what's growing in the underworld to break out and take life in the above world, in the upper world. Mm, mm. I see some typing. Oh, Hodis asks, is justice protecting cosmic potential? Hmm, that is a juicy question. Is justice protecting cosmic potential? And Agnew says, yeah, true, the things that fall between the cracks. Yeah, there's a lot that's fallen between the cracks, especially when I think about the sort of psychic underworld of America and all of the injustice that has not ripened yet. I mean, what is brewing in that underworld? As we think about this Pluto return that happened not long ago, and we think about this Pluto just moving into Aquarius in the tropical astrology. Woo! Yes, Pluto enters the chat. Yeah, I mean, I had also had a mind to like I don't know if we can like not talk about Pluto for a second. So I'm glad Pluto is finding their way into this chat right now because that's a lot about there's an element there about justice too. Although maybe not quite this softer, merciful side. Pluto might be some of the other side of it. Yes, this is justice protecting cosmic potential. I'm gonna let that sit with me for a second. I'm just gonna think about it. Polarities, am I right? Hoda says. Yeah, exactly. Oh, is justice protecting cosmic potential? Hmm. This question feels so alive, but yet nothing's coming up for me when I ask myself it. It just feels like maybe it feels too big for what I can handle right now. Uh, yeah. Agnew says it protects all potential, right? Now that's an interesting way to think of it. Protects all potential, right? It creates all these points where balance is maximized. And in an environment like that, runaway processes that can actually break through and fully burn through the universe are going to be rare or non existent. And so you get a slow burn. Yeah, I like what you're saying about these sort of runaway processes. This feels very aligned with what I feel like you were invoking with the fractal geometry as well, where it's like there's just so many complicated geometries happening here that are trying to be balanced. Wow. Julie says, makes me think of action and resting potential. Ah, the need for both to come up and to come down. Yeah. Now I'm thinking of like the wave. Uh-huh. And the quantum world is coming up for me now too. Wow. Yeah. And how that relates to this potential. Justice protects all potential, right? Yeah, I feel like the way that you're phrasing this, Agno, is again, it's like justice. Is this fair to say, guys? Like justice is a form of balance. It feels like it's a specific form of balance to me right now. I don't know how else to phrase that. Like all of justice isn't contained just in balance, and all of balance cannot be contained in justice. But these feel like these bodies feel very uh they feel like they're sharing a lot of spaces to me right now. Yeah, where balance is maximized. Yeah, in order for balance to be maximized, it's just the scale is huge. Hoda says, definitely. And Julie, musically, I don't know how, but for some reason, I'm picturing like Parks and Recreation style singing of homeostasis. I don't know why that's how I heard the homeostasis with the musical notes, Julie,
That
but
was like that was very accurate, Adam.
I'm glad. Agnew says it is balance that, if it had its way, would result in no motion ever. But we don't live in that world. And it says that's what it sounded like to me too. That's funny. It is balance that, if it had its way, would result in no motion ever. Mm. Mm. And when it says if it had its way, the it there for you, Agnew, is justice. But what's the it there? Everything would be perfectly dampened, says Agnew. Hmm. Libra, more specifically. Hmm. Hmm. I'm just sitting with that. Hmm. Hoda says sometimes balance makes me think of stagnancy, like a fixed pillar. Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's sort of like I don't know why. I think because I would have mentioned like this overlap between the sidereal Libra and tropical Scorpio, but like I'm thinking of like this sort of how like the move from like a balancing water to like a stagnant still water, like a fixed water, like in Scorpio. I have no idea why that image is coming up, but it is interesting this overlap. That's a whole other conversation though with sidereal and tropical. I don't want to like necessarily get into it, but I'm feeling like a weird urge to like add my spicy, stupid take on this for a second for some reason. So please disagree, as Noble likes to say. But like lately, I've been thinking about. I think it was the other day. I have this night sky app that I love using to like actually like if a star or planet's like really catching my eye, I'm like, all right, what is that? I want to make sure I know what the actual star that's pointing that's drawing me in. And as I was looking at that, like I think not long ago there was this massive pileup in Sagittarius, sidereal, right? And well, tropical it wasn't. It wasn't all in Sagittarius. It was spread out across signs. When you use the night sky app, you could see it was all in Sagittarius. And so it just made me think of like how sidereal is more closely lined up with the actual night sky that we might see and what planets where the planet is like that we could see with our eye kind of, or in this case the map, because I'm lazy. Um Whereas tropical, because it's lining up around the vernal equinox to keep Aries starting with the start of spring, um, how it feels like to me, it's sort of like more astral. So like in my mind, like lately, I've been thinking about this interplay where I feel like tropical is a little bit more like has this has the energy of like more astralized or more like mental sphere parts of these astrological dynamics. This where a sidereal feels more like I don't know, like the actual bodies and how we see them as humans. Anyway, sorry about that random tangent. If anyone has any thoughts on that or feels like being like, "Yo, what the hell are you talking about?" Please slap me in the face on that. But I just wanted to bring that up. Like I was thinking about that. Thank you, Agnew. Mm, see some typing, so I'm just gonna hold some space. Wow. Yeah, Hoda says I'm meditating on it a bit. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird take. But yeah, this interesting thing about like how balance is looking for like a stop to motion too is still coming it's still in my field. Like this thinking about like this balancing is trying to find its equilibrium. It's equilibrium, but it's always moving. Mm. Agnew says like tropical has more lead time. It's more to the heart, but sidereal might be more literal. Yeah, like how you phrase that with like more lead time. Yeah, like it's like this. Yeah, because like if it's more astralized, then it's more projected out, right? You're able to like kind of scry a little bit, maybe more in the astrals. And it says, I feel like what you said about tropical versus sidereal aligns with what I've heard about it, Adam. Yeah, and again, this is not my expertise, so definitely would I would always take my thoughts on astrology with a huge boulder of salt. But I was just thinking about that difference between sort of, yeah, I like how that phrase is like more literal archetypes versus more astral archetypes. Um, because like the picture I shared in that was coming to mind was like I thought it was so cool like when you actually saw the planets because the night sky app will like show you the planet it like enlarges the little dot into an actual planet and it was just kind of fun to see like where the sun the moon Mercury Venus where they were in relation to the actual archer it was also showing over the stars right where it was like this literal in the sense of like if you were to look at these stars with the eyes of looking at the shape of the archer. There's something potent about actually seeing the blinking lights as they configure within this sort of shape that's being formed by the constellation. That, like with tropical, you just don't have the same way because of its relationship with the actual night sky. Um, and I just, yeah, that really struck me as an interesting thing. And it says, yeah, I've had the same experience because I also use Star Walk a lot. Yeah, yeah, it's something fascinating. Like I feel like it gets it's like the modern version of the stargazing that happened in our ancestry sometimes. Hoda says agreed, I feel like tropical zodiac is mostly projection into space. Yeah, yeah. And that definitely aligns with kind of yeah, how I think about it too. That's really interesting. Really interesting. Whereas sidereal, Hoda says, kind of calls down the power of the stars constellation and gnosis of the stars. Yes. 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 And I just and for me too, like Yeah, the gnosis of the stars is I just love that phrase because I also just think so deeply about the way that the nakshatras, the sort of deeper fixed stars, um, inform that whole system of astrology and the gnosis that comes from the fixed stars, which in that tradition precede and predate the sort of zodiac, in that the zodiac is derived from the nakshatras according to that tradition. Um, and Anna says, and therefore projection on our bodies. Now that's interesting. Yeah, on our astral bodies, says Hoda. Yes. Mhm, mhm. Agnes says, I agree, except I think events in the astral prefigure physical events. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do too. I guess, yeah. Thank you for saying that. I'm trying to think of what, yeah, but that's a really good point. Yeah, I don't think that they don't, let me just let that sit for a second. But thank you for calling attention to that. Yeah, they certainly do. I think it goes back to this conversation that you had and others were about the potentials, right? The astral I see as like the potentials that prefigure, but we don't know what's going to happen until it happens, until the potentials clash with the events, right? That balance that Hoda was talking about with the scales, right? Where our unique individual hearts and countenances are sort of who we are at our core, smacking up against actual circumstances. And if we're lucky, yeah, we have that break and we're able to weigh this and really bring some intentionality to it. But often there's not intentionality, right? Um, Things are just ripening as they're going to ripen because of who we are, because of the circumstances that make themselves known. But I think that higher evolved Libra archetype is pointing to this sort of beautiful calculus where you can really try to match and try to really bring balance and equilibrium to who you are at your core and what the circumstances are sort of affording you the opportunity to demonstrate or to bring into the world or to express, etc. Julie says, now I'm thinking of Earth, Earth's axis, karma, and scales. Ooh, say more. Yeah. I like how you're bringing in the axis in here. And now I got Jimi Hendrix axis, boldest love in my head. Just at the axis. Mm. I'll have to put that in music after this. It's a great song. But yeah, Julie, if you have anything more you want to share on that, feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat. I do see your typing, sorry. Yo. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. As you're typing, I'm sort of getting this. Yeah, I can't really put words to it, but I'm feeling something on this. I'm like rocking back and forth for some reason as I'm thinking about this axis and how it relates to the karma and the scales. But I'm like just rocking. Not sure I can articulate more. No worries, Julie. No worries at all. I know that feeling too well, where it's like, yes, there's so much more, but I can't possibly express them in words. I'm sorry. Feels potent though. I'm gonna write that down. Yes, please do, and maybe see what comes through. But yeah, sometimes it's like you just hit that pre-verbal gnosis where it's like I can't really put words to this yet, but oh wow, I can feel the power of it. Agnew says that reminds me of that card that Hoda pulled in that container earlier this month, one of the circular ones. And this is specifically this threesome of the Earth's axis, karma, and scales, and bringing them together. Hmm. Wonder if it was justice. That'd be funny. If it was. Just to bring it all totally full circle. um, now I'm like picturing because of that phrase axis mundi. This is just the way. Like I don't know. I can never really tell if what's coming up in my mind if it's just like gray synapses firing against each other because there's connections or if there's more going on, right? But I'm thinking of axis mundi like I'm thinking of axis now like Earth's axis as like the Earth's spine and this sort of I don't know how else to describe it, but that's what's coming up right now. Like invoking the very spine of Earth as it relates to this balancing relating to karma and justice. Oda says, "Ooh, I wonder if it was the chariot." Agnes says, "I don't know the name. It's a picture of the zodiac. I think deep blue in the center, or the Earth and the zodiac banding the edge." Trying to think. Mm. The spine of the Earth, Oda says. Yeah, exactly. Like, ooh, makes me want to put my shoulders back just thinking about the spine of Earth. Like, ooh, let me put my shoulders back for her. Come on, goddess. Let's put our shoulders back, get our spine straight so that we can really balance. Mm. So I do want to be respectful of time. I see this 4:30. So I do want to maybe work to close the container. It is feeling pretty complete, but I feel like maybe I don't know if anyone else wants to just share some final takeaways, images, phrases, or maybe just things that they're going to sit with. I know Julie mentioned sort of sitting with this Earth's access kind of more and seeing what comes up. But I want to invite anyone else to share what might be a takeaway for them or what they're going to maybe sit with or think about a little bit more as it relates to this really juicy space on justice. Thank you, Anna. I had no anticipation of all this richness today. I love being surprised by this container every week. But does anyone have anything they want to share as a final takeaway, final question, final thought, image that's sticking with them? Just seeing some typing, so whew. Thank you, Otis. She said it was very full. Yeah, I'm feeling that way too. I feel like I just had a great meal with a bunch of awesome friends. Mm. And I do feel like I got to know Justice better. Yes. But it says it's difficult for me to choose one thing, but I feel like I'm going to partner with Ma'at in my next meditation. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's funny, actually, speaking of like justice archetypes and deities that rule over justice, um, the picture that I have is my PFP, which is hard to see, but that woman, that goddess that's showing up in the top right corner, actually, from when I drew that, it came to me as Themis, which is a Greek goddess of justice, which is I wouldn't say equivalent, but has a lot in common functionarily speaking, and some archetypal symbolism as Ma'at and sort of justice as we picture her. Bottom right, Agnes says. Oh, he was sharing. It was the Wheel of Fortune. Aha. The Wheel of Fortune was coming up. And I was kind of making him think of the axis. Yeah, because there's this beautiful axis point where you see all the planets and luminaries aligned. Now, what do they connect this time? Let's see. Yeah, I can't tell which two is there. That looks like Gemini. So is that Cancer? Can't tell. Anyway, yes, the Wheel of Fortune's been invoked too now. Thank you. Well, thank everybody once again um, for this. Thank you, Justice. for coming into this space, for sharing your wisdom with us through all of us. Um, and I really, yeah, I'm excited to see how this might show for people as folks have their own inner scales this week, um, measuring themselves up against the circumstances, measuring sort of what to do with their time this week. Thank you all. All right. Have a great rest of your week. And I look forward to seeing more. And we'll also continue the conversation in the pot. And there's a thread called Archetypal Hour where you can also share things too if it feels relevant to you. Thank you all. Have a great one.